I hear you, David. Thank you.
All right, over to you.
Okay, thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Hertzgaard. I'm the Executive Director and the co-founder of Covering Climate Now. And today's press briefing is why the climate fight is far from over. For those of you who don't know, Covering Climate Now is a global collaboration of over 600 news outlets that reach a total audience of billions of people around the world. We are organized by journalists for journalists to help all of us do better coverage of the defining story of our times. It costs nothing to join Covering Climate Now. There is no editorial line that you must follow as a journalist or a news organization, except you must respect climate science, which we've seen in recent days.
Nice condition, I like that.
Some of even the richest people in the world don't really know climate science very well. Covering Climate Now does trainings. We do for newsrooms. We do news events like this. This particular event, we will have the full recording broadcast quality of video and audio will be available on our website via a Dropbox within about 2 hours of our conclusion. Any Covering Climate Now partner is welcome to use that recording. You may use portions of it, you may use all of it. You do not have to clear any permissions or rights of usage. This is the property of Covering Climate Now. Simply do please put a credit line to Covering Climate Now if and when you use this. We are here at COP30 doing what Covering Climate Now likes to do, which is to network among our fellow journalists around the world, to build connections, to build a sense of community among journalists on the climate beat. And as part of that, we're even going to be sponsoring some happy hours for journalists only, 2 of them later on in COP. We will buy you your first caipirinha. After that, you're on your own.
Sorry, Mark, do podcasters qualify?
Podcasters, in your case, yes, they qualify. And not only in your case, Christiana, also podcasters. But this is a good question, because Covering Climate Now, it is for journalists only. So no government officials, no business officials, no PR officials, and even no activists, because as journalists, we have to cover all of those people. So those of you who are watching on screen from around the world, you cannot see, but I'll just tell you that there are colleagues of yours here in the room. I'm going to be talking to Christiana Figueres here in a moment and asking questions. I'll be taking questions from journalists in the room, and some questions have already been sent in advance, but we also invite you to submit your questions. Please go to the bottom of your Zoom screen in the Q&A. Let me repeat that. In the Q&A, send in your question. When you send it in, give us your name and your news outlet, please. We will get to as many of those questions as we can. This event today is part of the 89% Project. That is a year-long initiative that Covering Climate Now has been doing with our lead partners, leadership from our lead partners, The Guardian, reporter is here today from The Guardian, and Agence France Presse. We have for a year been exploring what I think is one of the most surprising stories that I have come across in my many years on the climate beat. I am so experienced on the climate beat that I was here in 1992 when the very first climate summit happened here in Brazil. Obviously, that was in Rio de Janeiro. Here's the surprising story. 80 to 89% of the people around the world want their governments to do more about climate change. They want stronger action from their governments. 80 to 89%. That's not Mark Hertzgaard telling you that. That is peer-reviewed social science from Nature, from Oxford, from the European Commission. All of these studies very consistently are finding that 8 out of 10 people on the planet want their governments to do more. But here's the kicker. This massive global climate majority does not know that it's the majority. They think they're the minority. They think they're 29%. And so they don't act like the majority. They don't vote like a majority. They don't push their politicians or talk to their friends and neighbors like a majority. That's part of the reason that we've done this project here at COP30, because guess what? Their political leaders also don't know that they're a majority. So as journalists, that's what we're trying to bring out here today. And so that's the 89% project that I've talked about. And one more note before we get started, we are collaborating here. We're very proud to say this. Our host here today, Info Amazonia. And I want you to look here. This is Casa do Jornalismo Socioambiental. That means the House of Social Environmental Journalism. We're here downtown Belem, Brazil, and Info Amazonia is a network of about 21 news outlets across the Amazon who are reporting on COP30 on a daily basis. And I urge all of you to look at their reporting. They are writing in Portuguese. We are then translating it into Spanish and English, and it will be available starting today on their website, infoamazonia.org. And we will also have it at coveringclimatenow.org. We're very proud at Covering Climate Now to be partnering with them and on this particular project, because so often, if we're honest as journalists, we know this. So often we as journalists, we fly into a place, we pretend that we know what's going on and tell the people back home what is going on. And oftentimes we don't really understand the context and we get things wrong. So let's avoid that. And you can avoid that in your COP30 coverage by looking at the coverage coming out of these 21 news outlets in Info Amazonia in Spanish, in English, in Portuguese. If you happen to read that, you are welcome to publish that content. You can quote from that content. But above all, we hope you will be informed by that content, so you avoid making those kinds of parachuting in mistakes. So with that as introduction, I'm going to tell you about today's session, and just give me one moment here. Today's session, of course, as I told you already, is why the fight against climate change is far from over. A couple of weeks ago, the New York Times asked, quote, "Has the world given up on fighting climate change?" It might look that way. As President Donald Trump blusters about fossil fuels, as Bill Gates prioritizes children's health over climate protection, and as oil and gas companies and their bankers project decades of higher production that would wreck the planet. But those facts are far from the whole picture. That's what we're going to talk about today. The overwhelming majority of the world's people, as I mentioned, 80 to 89% want stronger action. And as Christiana Figueres is going to be talking about in a moment, clean energy technologies are racing ahead around the world. They are attracting twice as much investment as fossil fuels did. And solar power and regenerative agriculture, particularly asking about, are surging across the global south. To tell us more about this, it is my great pleasure and really an honor for Covering Climate Now to introduce Christiana Figueres. I'm sure you all know her, but I'm going to give you her formal bio anyway. She is a founding partner.
Briefly.
Very briefly. Look, it's right here.
Okay, good.
She's a founding partner of Global Optimism. That is an NGO that you should be following if you're not already. She is the co-presenter of the climate podcast Outrage Plus Optimism. She's the co-author of the book The Future We Choose: The Stubborn Optimist's Guide to the Climate Crisis. And of course, from 2010 to 2016, she was the executive secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, where she played a key role in the process that secured the landmark Paris Agreement on climate change. I invite all of you to give Christiana Figueres a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Mark. And you forgot the most important.
I always do.
No, you don't.
Tell me.
In addition to all of your wonderful press coverage that you are providing, because I do agree with you that it's very difficult for any member of the press to get their hands around something as complex as COP. So in addition to all the written materials that you all have, we have actually, on behalf of the COP presidency at their request, we have launched the official COP30 podcast.
I did not know that. I beg your pardon.
And so the official COP30 podcast is entitled Inside COP. And we are doing the absolutely crazy thing of launching an episode every single day. We have now interviewed, of course, Ambassador Belem as the president of the COP. We have interviewed Ed Miliband, who's the minister in Britain, and Minister Marina Silva, and some Brazilian NGOs. So yeah, if you want to have a fun way of catching up with what the COP is doing, then listen to our podcast. We are committed to not making it over 40 minutes, closer to 30, hopefully. But I promise you that it's informative and fun. Because honestly, we have to have fun while we're here or we don't survive. So for me, Mark, it's very fun to be at a COP as a member of the press. That's the first time in my life. Because obviously heretofore, I was leading the secretariat and have always been either a negotiator for my country or the head of the secretariat, the position that Simon Steele holds today. And always very mindful of the very difficult work that the press has in front, but never had to do it myself. So I'm now walking in your shoes, and the shoes hurt because it's difficult. It is really difficult to take something that has so many different aspects to it, so many events, so much going on in the multilateral area, in this COP, especially so much going on in the what we call the real world area, i.e. the green zone. And make sense of it. How do you extract yourself from this event and that event and that other event? And how do you pull messages that represent at least part of what is going on and put it in words that are understandable to those who read us, listen to us, or who view us? Not an easy job. So I was always very grateful to the press corps that does such an incredible job. But now, being a part of it, I'm even more grateful.
And tell us one more time the name of the podcast.
Yes, it's called Inside COP.
Inside COP. Tune in, folks. I'm going to start with a wild guess.
Okay.
I'm going to guess that you probably don't agree with the deniers on one side or the people who are sort of defeatists on the other side that the climate fight is pointless at this stage.
That's a good guess.
Can you tell us why?
Well, first of all, I don't agree with deniers because I'm not in the habit of denying science, for example, gravity. I do think that there's a scientific reason why we're all sitting here and not floating. And I just don't see any space in any mental capacity to deny climate change. So that one is off. To those who have moved from climate denial to climate despair,
Or defeatism,
which is on the other side. I mean, at least they're being consistent in keeping to the D, right? It's denial, despair, defeatism. So they're all sticking to that initial D. But I really question whether that attitude of thinking that there's nothing that we're doing, and in fact, nothing that we can do, whether that is an internal emotion or whether that is actually based on information. And I think it's the first. And I can talk about whenever you lead us there, Mark, to what I call pre-traumatic syndrome, which I think many people are suffering from. We know what post-traumatic syndrome is, but pre-traumatic syndrome is something that I think is dangerously being experienced by many people. But whether that obeys to something within us, a fear, a very normal, understandable human fear, I think that's where that is. And we also have the possibility of meeting that fear with information so that we don't wallow in our own fear, but we actually say, okay, this is a threat, absolutely. We cannot deny that climate change is arguably the biggest threat that humanity has ever faced. Fine. Now, what are we doing about it? And there's just an extraordinary amount of data that proves that we are definitely behind schedule. And at the same time, we're ahead of the curve of where we thought we would be. So let me give you a couple of examples. I have a vehicle in Costa Rica because I live very far away from everything, accompanied by the macaws and the howling monkeys. And I have an electric vehicle. Now, 10 years ago, when we adopted the Paris Agreement, the market of vehicles showed that 1 in every 100 vehicles that was sold was electric. And the way that that industry was projecting itself was that maybe perhaps under many conditions, sort of more related to science fiction than anything else, maybe we would have a serious participation of electric vehicles in the market. Well, today, 1 in every 5 vehicles that are sold is electric. 1 in every 5. And that is actually even more concentrated in China, because they are the greatest producers of electric. In fact, in China, it's very difficult to find a combustion. Another example, we're investing as a whole, the whole financial community is investing today already 2 times as much, i.e. 2 trillion, into the family of clean technologies and renewable energy technologies than we are into the fossil fuel industry. 2 times as much, and growing. The IEA, which is the International Energy Agency, highest authority of energy in the world, produces every year their yearly report on what they're seeing as energy trends in the future. And every year since 2015, they have had to correct their projections because they could not get and they're sitting in the middle of this data, but they could not get their heads around the degree of exponential change and transformation that we would see in the energy and the transport sector. And that continues to be the case. So the fact is that we are definitely behind where science tells us that we should be, but we're also way ahead of where we thought technology could take us in 10 years. Today, we saw the new data on the updated data on NDCs that says that compared to the baseline, which is 2019, according to the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which are the national plans that countries submit, we are 22% under that baseline. Now, the first thing that we have to realize is, well, 22 is substantially inferior to the 45% where we have to be by 2030, because we know that would keep us on track. Yes, and it is 22% below, because in Paris 10 years ago, we were still going up by 18%. And so we were still on a rising curve of emissions. Now the curve of emissions has actually reached the top of wherever it was going to go, plateaued, and is beginning to come down. So it's important to understand that, yes, you can take a photograph, a still photograph of what the economy is, and conclude that we're not there yet. But you can also take a video, which means look at the trend, look at the trajectory that we're on, and conclude not bad. Both of those realities are true. And we have to be able to hold at least two realities in equal standing and not think that one is more true than the other or that one contradicts the other. Just like a video doesn't contradict a photograph or vice versa. Those two things are true at the same time.
I want to urge all my fellow journalists that the data that Christiana Figueres just gave us, there is a lot more of that.
A lot.
Go to the globaloptimism.org website, and there is just reams and reams of additional specifics that are well sourced and documented that you can use in your stories. I was particularly struck. I've been privileged to do a lot of reporting in the global South, especially in rural areas. And I've been doing this a long time. I was very surprised to read in your documents how fast regenerative agriculture is taking off across the global South. How can you give just a brief description of how fast that is and why is that happening? I must confess, I was very surprised at that.
It is taking off very quickly. I would say it is beginning that exponential curve that we're seeing in the energy and in the transport sector. So that is quite exciting. Why that is so, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say why I suspect. I suspect that in the global South, we have more economies that depend on agriculture, that depend on agricultural products, both for the national economy, but also for export. I suspect that the global North imports more food than the global South, that is basically much more of an exporter. And hence, we have much more of our land devoted to agriculture. We have much more of our employment dedicated to agriculture, and a substantial higher part of our economy, both for our own domestic GDP as well as our exports. So I think that is the reason why, and there's another reason also actually that I'm adding to that. And that is, as we all know, it is the global South that is being most affected by the consequences of climate change. So we are feeling the effects of hurricanes, typhoons, at the Philippines, hurricanes, look at Jamaica, Melissa, droughts, floods. We are feeling the impacts of extreme weather events more than the global North, just because that's the way it plays out. The belt around the equator is the one that is already and will continue to feel most of the effects, and that is where most of the global South countries are. And so because it is so much of a lived reality for us, we are much more aware of the impact of these, especially hydrological changes and temperature changes on our agro space than countries who experience a tomato because it's in their supermarket. Right. We experience a tomato as we're trying to produce it.
In the ground.
In the ground. And that makes a difference. That makes a difference. So, you know, the person who just goes to the supermarket and goes like, oh, okay, well, I can buy this tomato or that tomato and doesn't really care where it's coming from or what the transport or whatever. But we are concerned about, can we produce the tomato? And can we produce the tomato at competitive prices? So we need to keep those factors much more in mind. And we can see that our agriculture is being hit all the time. Hence, we actually don't have any other option but to move over to regenerative agriculture if we want to keep that sector of the economy alive.
So those of you who are reporting from global South countries, this is an underreported climate story that I urge you to go and look at. I'm going to ask one more quick question. I'm asking for a quick answer because I want to go.
You can see that, sorry, in many products, right? You can see it in coffee, you can see it in bananas, you can see it in cocoa, you can see it in grapes, you can in cotton, you can see it no matter what product you look at, you can already see the impacts of natural events.
So one quick question from me, and then I'm going to go here in the room to Darna Noor from The Guardian, and I've got a couple of questions. Oh, not yet. Everybody's very eager. Just one, can we just get a quick reaction from you about this 80 to 89% number? As I said earlier, I was very surprised, and I've been covering this a long time, that the number is so high. But the question I want to ask you is, why is it that 80 to 89%, this massive supermajority, why aren't they acting like a majority? Why aren't they voting like a majority? Because frankly, my colleagues in the media skeptically ask, well, if that's the case, why do people like Donald Trump get elected?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very good question.
Nothing to ask about Trump.
No, but yeah, why is that 89%
Passive.
not reflected in national elections? So we can put out a couple of theories about it. I would say that 89% is a strong sentiment, but a soft personal choice. A soft personal choice in the sense that it is frankly easier for me to derive conclusions from what I see happening around me, because I know that the weather is really weirding. I know that birds are coming sooner in their migration patterns. I know that my products are drying on the vine. I know all of that, but it is easier for me to export the responsibility of that to governments and to say, you governments, fix this problem. So that is one theory. It's just easier to export responsibility. The other part, and I think all of this plays a part. The other bit is to understand that there continues to be a conceptual gap between extreme weather events and all of this and my capacity to contribute to it.
What can I do about it?
What can I do about it, right? There is sort of a sense of, here we are, I can't do anything about it, you fix it. What we have not done to close that gap is to bring the actions that will address climate change in a personal level. My choices of transport, my choices of what I purchase, my choices of what electricity I choose, my choice of how I vote. How do we bring something that is arguably the biggest threat to humanity? How do I bring that down from the planetary level to my individual level? And how do I do that in a way that is beneficial for me? Because I will act in my own benefit. I will act in the benefit and in the protection of my family. But that link hasn't been made yet. I still, as a normal citizen of any country, I don't understand that actually having a city or a town that has more green cover and less fossil fuel vehicles is actually protecting my child from asthma. And that I therefore should vote and should do my community to plant more trees, vote for those local leaders that are conscious of it. It's a difficult gap to bring together, to close. I think we are moving in that direction, but it's going to take a while. It's sort of the long tail, right? The long tail. Yes, there are big actions there that governments can take, for example, the agreements that they come to. But the reality of what that political force is, and then how I, as an individual, as the head of my family, as the mother of a family, how do I participate in that to my benefit. That's the piece. It's not that I participated in because it is my moral responsibility. I honestly do not think that that's going to get us very far. Some people, yes, and I am truly grateful for those who are more motivated by their moral responsibility. But the movable middle is not going to be motivated by that. The movable middle is going to say, okay, I don't have anything against climate change and I want the government to do something about it. Now tell me, how can I do something in my immediate life that benefits me and my family?
So folks, as journalists, that's our job.
Yes.
We're not activists, but we can certainly draw those connections for our readers, listeners, and viewers. So I'm going to go now to the first question from here in the room. I'll just remind everybody, everything that is said here is on the record, so you don't have to ask the question in order to quote the answers. We're going to start with my esteemed colleague, Darna Noor from The Guardian.
Thanks so much, Mark, and thanks for doing this. So appreciate you being here, and appreciate the hope that you've just laid out, that you've seen from the shifts in the market. I'm wondering if you are concerned about the potential, let's say, sort of unofficial interference that some said we might see from the Trump administration in the coming weeks to attempt to change the economic picture. Some are especially worried, I think, like the International Maritime Organization negotiations last week, during which, of course, the Trump administration threatened tariffs on countries who signed up to a global carbon fee on shipping. So just wondering if this is of concern, this attempt to sort of intervene in the market in that way, potentially, and how countries should prepare or respond if that doesn't fit.
There is a marked difference between the IMO and the Plastics Treaty that I will put into your question. There is a difference between the IMO and the Plastics Treaty.
Just interrupt. IMO is International Maritime Organization, for those of you who are maybe not familiar with that acronym.
Thank you for that. Thank you. A year ago, the IMO took the decision that this year they would actually vote on putting the maritime reduction targets on the table and adopt them. And it was very interesting to watch the difference between a year ago and this year. A year ago, Saudi Arabia called for a vote, which we can't do in the climate convention, called for a vote at the Maritime Organization and lost the vote because most countries want to regulate the maritime industry. Interesting that they called for a vote that they then lost. Now, the United States was part of that. This year, the United States continues to this day to be a part of the IMO and hence was able to exert political pressure through what I honestly call bullying tactics, because there's no other word to describe it, bullying tactics of imposing unprecedented and unwarranted tariffs on countries and ports that would adopt that decision. So it was postponed for a year. The United States is part of the IMO and acted very deliberately. The same thing in the Plastics Treaty, they brought it down because they were part of it. I will remind you that the United States administration has decided not to be a party of the Paris Agreement, to which I go, ciao bambino. You want to leave? Leave. I mean, the way I see this.
Is it a good thing that they're not here?
I actually think it is. I actually think it is a good thing.
Why?
Because, they will, to answer your question there, I do think that they will be working through the Saudis and through maybe others, as they have in other contexts, but they cannot take the floor. They are not here in person. I think it diminishes their credibility. And they won't be able to do their, direct bullying that they do. They will be doing indirect bullying for sure. The United States as a country will be represented by many subnational leaders who are here, members of Congress, mayors, governors, Gavin Newsom for one, who will be with me this afternoon. So we cannot say that it is the United States population as a whole that has denied science. There are those who are still responsible are still here. The way I think about it is, if you look at all of the data and the trajectory and you understand the video concept, okay, that we're looking at trends here and trajectories, then you understand that what that tells us is that since Paris, the effect of Paris has been that we have built a fast track toward decarbonization of the global economy, a track that needs to become even faster, but that is already increasing in speed. And that there are many lanes in that track. Each lane or each vehicle in those lanes can be a country, a city, a corporation, a financial institution. So everybody chooses their way of engaging and participating in that fast track. Now we have a particular vehicle that has decided that they don't want to be on that fast track, that they want to park themselves on the side. And not only do they park themselves on the side, but they start flashing these little orange lights in order to attract attention, in order to have all of us ask, what about the United States? And we're like, yeah, those are flashing lights. Does it stop the fast track? No. Honestly, the decarbonization of the global economy is irreversible. It is picking up speed. It is, the momentum is building to the point where it is simply unstoppable, with or without the United States.
I'm going to ask you to make that same answer in Espanol, because Vanessa Howe at Telemundo.
Vanessa, mi amiga Vanessa.
So here's her question, and it's basically the one you just answered. So if you can put it in Spanish, they want to use it on the air. Apologies to everybody here who does not speak Spanish, but it's going to be much what she just said, I think. Vanessa's question: the Paris Agreement adopted 10 years ago. Looking back, what would you say are the biggest successes, and what needs to be done now to keep the planet moving towards a safe climate path?
That's Vanessa's question?
Yes.
Vanessa, si tenés 3 días o 3 años te contesto esa pregunta, pero bueno. Vamos a ver si lo puedo resumir. A mí me parece que el Acuerdo de París lo que ha hecho es ha detonado una descarbonización de un grupo de sectores de la economía global, y que esa descarbonización de los sectores de energía, de transporte y de almacenamiento de energético, que son los 3 sectores que están más avanzados, lo que comprueba es que esas tecnologías son competitivas cuando se comparan con las tecnologías del pasado. Y esos 3 sectores ya nos están llevando a unos datos de descarbonización global que nunca jamás nos hubiéramos podido imaginar hace 10 años. Eso no quiere decir que todos los sectores están descarbonizando aún. Yo sí pienso que vamos a llegar al momento en que podemos descarbonizar todos los sectores, pero hay algunos que son por muchas razones más difíciles de descarbonizar y que están todavía en fase del descubrimiento tanto de los patrones económicos, de los flujos de inversión, como de las tecnologías que nos van a permitir descarbonizar. Entonces, me parece que aquí estamos en una situación en donde hay algunos sectores que están muy avanzados y otros que todavía necesitan el apoyo.
Very nice. I'm going to ask you now a question from China. Friends at the paper in China, that's an English name, obviously, but they publish in Mandarin. From my colleague that we don't.
But I'm not going to speak in Mandarin.
I'm not going to ask you to do that, not even basic Mandarin. Can climate adaptation become a central pillar of the COP30 negotiations? A central pillar?
I believe that is what the COP presidency is trying to do. I think that given the Brazilian reality, given the Latin American reality, given the global South reality, which is that because we have not mitigated, because we have not reduced our emissions as fast as we ought to have done, the huge urgency for us alongside mitigation is adaptation. And the Brazilians understand that because it's a living reality for them. And so they are very much intent on putting adaptation at the center of the conversation. They're also putting indigenous rights at the center of the conversation and everything to do with forestry, because we're in the Amazon, in case you haven't noticed. They're putting everything to do with forestry, recuperation of degraded lands, all of those land use issues also on the table. So one thing that we have to look out for that is very interesting about this COP is the innovative nature of this COP. This COP presidency is really using their political capacity to bring other topics to the table, to put them front and center, that other COP presidencies just either didn't feel motivated to or didn't feel they had the political maneuvering capacity. I think we will see a lot. We're already seeing a lot of innovation from this COP presidency.
Do you favor the TFFF? For those who don't know, this is the Tropical Forest Forever initiative that the government put forward. Are you in favor of that?
It is speaking of innovation, thank you
Very
for bringing that up. Very innovative, and they launched it in consultation with many governments.
You mentioned indigenous, it's unprecedented. 20% of the money goes to indigenous.
Absolutely, and it's a very innovative way of being able to capture finance and put it into the forestry sector. Very ambitious. They are hoping for a capitalization of 125 billion. Right now, they have had commitments of 5.5 billion and counting, which is a very good start. They also have just 2 or 3 weeks ago, they were able to secure the World Bank as a trustee, which gives us a huge amount of credibility and confidence. So this, yeah, as I say, this is yet another way in which the Brazilians are being innovative about how do we solve these problems and using their political capital to put innovative proposals on the table.
We're going to go to Kesuke Katori from others.
Questions from Brazilian.
There will be. Others were in line before you. I'm sorry, they were in line before you. Kesuke Katori from the Asahi Shimbun in Japan.
Sorry, Mark. Would you split it for him to pass
Pass the microphone.
Otherwise, folks from outside will hear.
Thank you so much for being here and taking my questions. My name is Kesuke Katori, Asahi Shimbun, super journalist from Japan. So I'm asking about the reform process. So the negotiation phase of Paris Agreement has concluded, and we are now transitioning to the phase of implementation stage. And meanwhile, the annual COP has grown increasingly important, making the law in terms of efficacy and as a message to society that's clear. What does constitute effective COP reform to the half global warming?
Let me quickly summarize that for people here. Question from our colleague in Japan, Keisuke Katori of the Asahi Shimbun, is about reforming the COP process. What do you see as effective reforms of the COP process, referring to the fact that it's consensus decision-making where one country can block if necessary? What are the reforms that you see as possible and desirable?
There are at least 5 processes started by many different coalitions, some NGOs and think tanks, one actually led by the UNFCCC Secretariat itself. So many processes that are thinking exactly about your question. And I do believe that over the next few years, we will see some evolution of how COPs are organized. It's important to understand that that COPs were designed to support the governmental multilateral negotiation process of agreeing to and adopting legally binding agreements. That was the purpose. That's why we designed it. And I speak with some authority since I was part of that group that designed the COPs. So I know what they're meant to do. And as you have pointed out, substantially, at least for now, for the next few decades, we have the Paris Agreement that takes us through several decades still. So the question does arise, so should we still have a COP? Absolutely, because there is no environmental police in this world. Every single nation is sovereign. No one can tell, no nation can tell another nation what to do. No person can tell another government, another nation what to do. And so because of the individual sovereignty of all nations, the only way that they can actually monitor their progress is to keep each other accountable. And so that mutual accountability, that tracking of progress, is what the COP is now moving toward, so that every time the countries get together, they are doing, and they will increasingly move into that tracking process, into that accountability process, to be able to measure how much progress do we have and how much more ought we to be pursuing. At the same time, not because it was part of the original design, but just because it's a reflection of reality. What COPs also do, in addition to what I just said, which happens in the blue zone, but what COPs also do, and it was started in 2011, since then, what has occurred is the COP does convene a huge number of institutions, coalitions, stakeholders who come together, who use the COP as a convening moment and a convening place to do what I used to think of when I was in kindergarten as show and tell. Does anybody remember show and tell? In kindergarten, the teacher would say, come and show your friends what you have done. And we would stand up there and we would go, well, here is what do you remember that? So show and tell. So this is a huge show and tell. This is a platform like no other that allows for stakeholders, whether they be private, civil society, investors, influence groups, to show to the world the progress that they have made, who they are working with, who's in their coalitions, and also very importantly, the problems that they're facing, the challenges that they're facing in wanting to support the decarbonization process. That is an important role of the COP that was not originally intended, but that we have grown to that. That is the reason why the COP presidency calls this an implementation COP.
Let me go to the question from.
Thanks.
There you go.
Sorry, the anxiety here. I'd like to ask exactly about that, this idea of COP of implementation. In concrete terms, what this COP should deliver in the end, that afterwards we can say, yes, this was the COP of implementation, because it sounds so, less concrete. And how can we concretize that?
So what, for the online audience, the question is, what will constitute success at COP30?
Yeah, it should be considered a implementation COP.
This is a very difficult COP to guide towards success. Not because we're going to fail, but because it's going to be very difficult to communicate success.
Yes.
It's much easier to communicate success when you're in a binary world of you either adopt the legal agreement or you don't. So let's just give the example. In Copenhagen, if anybody was born by that time, 2009, all countries came together and they were supposed to adopt a legal agreement. Did they? No. Was that a success? I actually think it was successful in teaching us many things. But strictly from the point of view of what it was supposed to do, it didn't do that. We go to Paris. Was that a success? Yes, resounding success. That is it is a complicated COP and COP process to obviously to organize, hold, and deliver. But the communication of it is simpler because you can say, this is the text that we all agreed to and that we gavelled. Done. This COP is much more difficult to communicate because on the multilateral side in the blue zone, there is no overarching legal agreement that anybody came here to negotiate. Everyone is here in the blue zone, the governments are here to look at many important details about the implementation that will help that implementation. But every year we add to the details. It's a little bit like, oh, I forgot that maybe we should add, and then we add more things. And that additive agenda has just grown and grown and grown. So from a political perspective, it is much more difficult for the COP presidency to harvest all of those issues that are on the table in the blue zone among governments, to harvest all of that cannot go into a legally binding decision because that's not the point. To harvest all of that into a political document that is not legally binding, a political document that makes sense, that represents the plethora of many issues that are on the table, and that can be communicated, that can be shown to the press and to the public and say, this is what we did. Very difficult. And as though that were not difficult enough, this courageous COP presidency has said, guess what? We're going to try to do that not just in the blue zone, but in the green zone also. Oh my God. Oh my God. What a courageous presidency. Because honestly, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of demonstrations, of initiatives and progress and projects, coalitions in all sectors that you could possibly imagine, in all countries that you could possibly imagine. That is just, it's like going to the market, the peso, when they just brought everything, and there's so much there you don't even know where to start. And
that's the fish market here in Belem, for those of you.
The fish and vegetable and artisanry market, it is just, overwhelming because there's so much there. That's the green zone. And the COP presidency is saying, this is an implementation COP, and hence they will have to figure out how, from a political perspective, they bring all of this together and communicate it to you, the press, and to the public in a way that proves that this was an implementation COP.
So that's
incredibly courageous presidency, okay? Very courageous. Exactly what they have to do. Sorry, Mark. Exactly what they have to do at this point in the process of progress of climate change. Absolutely well identified what they have to do. And they stepped into that challenge. They could have hid from the challenge. They didn't. They stepped into the challenge, very courageous, and we should all help them.
That's our job, folks. Communication, that's our business. So bear in mind here, it's not about whether a formal agreement necessarily gets signed. It's communicating this plethora of different ideas that Christiana Figueres just described. I'm going to try and sneak in one last quick question from, she asked first, very quick. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes.
Very quick though.
Portugal, can you elaborate a little more about how the citizens can sign up that willingness to for change, like they want change, and you're thinking about how they can do some things themselves. We have evolved in journalism to take that responsibility from citizens and put it in the governments. But you mentioned something very interesting, is to have both things can be true at the same time. So if people, if you are a communicator now, how are you communicating?
I hope I was always a communicator. Otherwise, my life would
You're a
be.
podcaster, and you have learned to use other words and other tools. How can we communicate and without taking the responsibility from the governments?
So the question for those of us who are online, what can ordinary citizens do to communicate the fact that 80 to 89% of us want this to happen?
I would actually push that a little bit more even. It's not just that citizens have to communicate it. We have to live it. That's what we're not doing. Because we are communicating that we want our governments to do more. But what we're not doing is we're not living accordingly. We're not making choices in our daily life that communicate or that are in a line of integrity with what we know we ought to be doing. That to me is the challenge, because there is no doubt that it's not that we're living in a world that is looking at climate change. We're living in a changed world already. We're living in a changed world already. So this is not a vision into the future or a threat of the future. This is our lived experience, as we have talked about. So the way that I live my life has to be consistent with my desire to minimize the impacts of climate change on future generations. That is the challenge for me. And that means, and I would like to come back to the pre-traumatic syndrome, because are we wrapping up here?
Pretty soon.
When I speak about pre-traumatic syndrome, I speak about so many people, especially young people, who are caught in the pain of seeing that the world is changing. The only, and that they think they can't do anything about it. The only way out of being caught in that very dark box is to do something about it. That's the only way. And there is so much literature and research that is out there that confirms this. That the only way for me, if I were in a dark box, which I'm not, but if I were in a dark box, to get out of it is actually to look around me, look at my family, look at the neighborhood in which I live, and say, right, from here to the next month, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to contribute to the, for example, the greenery around. I'm going to teach my children that watering a plant is not just watering a plant, it's taking care of the planet. I'm going to teach my children that wasting electricity is not just about wasting electricity. It is also about taking care of their planet and the kind of life that they want to have. It is about being a responsible citizen in everything that we do, and especially it's about teaching our children, because that generation is already being born into a world that is irrevocably changed. And they need to step into that world with confidence that they can have an impact, not with a sense that there's nothing that we can do. So who we are as human beings, who we are as adults, and what messages we give to the future generations is very much a part and parcel of getting out of our dark box.
So we leave behind pre-traumatic syndrome and we walk the talk.
Yeah.
So one last question.
That was very inspirational. My question is technical and political.
Go for it.
I mean, Taylor from Estonia. My question is on finance regarding like what has been happening with the 100 billion goal, then the NCUG, all the discussions around the roadmap. Is the lack of public finance in practice still an issue of lack of political will? Or do you think it's technically no more an option, like to consider climate finance?
No, go ahead.
I'm with you.
Oh, okay, and that's my technical and political question. And my quick question, the other one is, when are we going to listen an edition of the podcast in Spanish?
Ah,
I mean, ya sola.
We did not.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, we actually have an agreement with a Colombian NGO that has a podcast for them to at least translate part of our podcast into Spanish, but let me know if they're doing it or not. So I'll get on there. That Nina's podcast is supposed to be translating into Spanish. Let me know. Finance. I think it is important to recognize that the famous 100 billion is a political tool. It is actually not what is going to move the needle. It is an agreement that we have inherited from many, many years ago. Sadly, it still has to be lived up to. And as you point out, it is getting more and more difficult in a world that has the kinds of wars that we have, where defense budgets apparently are going up for that reason, and where we have the kind of polarization and confrontation that we have, and where countries feel like they need to move over to that side of the equation with their public finance. I do point out that 100 billion is ridiculous in terms of decarbonizing the global economy. I just already mentioned that we are investing 2 trillion, because it has to begin with a TR and not with a B, $2 trillion into renewable energy. And that, of course, is a very, very small part of that. It's public, and most of it is foreign direct investment, because that is where capital is. So we shouldn't confuse the tail of the dog with the dog. The 100 billion is the tail. It does wag the dog, but it's not the dog. And the sad thing is, for those of us in the global south, that neither the 100 billion that is supposed to flow to us in the south, nor the trillions from foreign direct investment are coming to the south at the levels that they should. So both of those, neither the minuscule billion nor the foreign direct investment is flowing. I suspect that slowly but surely, we're going to be able to correct that, because many countries in the South have discovered that it is in their interest to use their own energy sources to increase their energy independence. And we know that 70% of the potential of renewable energy in the world is in the global south, and 50% of the minerals that are necessary for the transition is in the global south. So money will go to where the investment opportunities are if the policy and regulation conditions for investment are in place. So the fact is that we now know that the investment opportunities are there, and that a lot of our international private financing will be looking for these opportunities. What is not there yet is on the part of the public sector in our countries to give the investment conditions that are necessary to bring that capital. Because we're beginning to understand that it is in our interest, I think that is slowly going to move. And we're beginning to see countries Nigeria being an oil and gas country that is actually absorbing so much solar investment, and Chile and Colombia and so many other countries, we're beginning to get there slowly. So it's interesting that the public sector responsibility, where I see that now, in order to bring the trillions that are necessary, is the public sector of developing countries that needs to put in those investment conditions.
We're going to have to leave it there. It has been a very interesting hour. I hope all of you who have been joining us around the world have learned from this. I want to repeat that Covering Climate Now will have the full recording of this available within about 2 hours. Come to our website, coveringclimatenow.org. You can access that. All Covering Climate Now partner news outlets around the world are allowed to use any or all of this recording. Please do credit Covering Climate Now when you do. And with that, I want to thank Christiana Figueres very much for being with us. I want to thank our hosts, Info Amazonia here at the Casa do Jornalismo Social Ambiental, the House of Social Environmental Journalism. I want to thank all my colleagues who are here in the room with us. I wish you all a good COP30. For everyone else, I'm Mark Hertzgaard on behalf of Covering Climate Now, and we wish you a very good day.